identity and the foundation of self. And let's really start to get into what this actually means for you, for all of us, for myself included. One of the great developmental theorists is a man whose name is Erik Erikson. And he says that all of us share the same 3 core wounds that happen to each of us in childhood between the ages of 0 to 5. These 3 core wounds are betrayal, abandonment, and broken trust. And they happen within the matrix of mommy and daddy, meaning they happen within a relational matrix. Holding in mind what the definition of original trauma is, something outside of your control, something that feels threatening to your survival, etc. So, let's assume for the purpose of this video that we are talking about mommy and daddy, but as we all know, it could be grandma, it could be auntie and uncle, it could be adoptive parents or caregivers or whatever. But for the purpose of this video, I'll name mommy and daddy. Mommy and daddy hold the framework for all of us as children, defining what the relationship between themselves and the child will be. And Erik Erikson believes that between the ages of 0 to 5, each and every one of us experiences betrayal, abandonment, and broken trust. And I venture to guess 90% of the time, our parents aren't trying to cause us harm. They're not trying to traumatize us. It's a byproduct of unconscious behavior on their parts and not being psychologically aware. But let's say that you are 5 years old, 4 years old even, and you tell mommy a secret, and mommy promises to keep this secret. Then you find out that she has told daddy because somehow daddy let it slip. You, the child, experience such a betrayal in the moment. And it's hard for you to understand it as it's actually happening. What just happened? What does it mean to be about myself? Abandonment, remember, we're talking about betrayal, abandonment, and broken trust. Abandonment doesn't necessarily mean a physical abandonment. Abandonment means any time emotionally we are left kind of hanging over the cliff, left to our own devices. Here's an example. Let's say Johnny comes downstairs, mommy's in the kitchen organizing dinner, and Johnny comes downstairs and he's quite teary. And let's say that Johnny's in the 3rd grade, placing him at about the age of 8 or 9 years old. And mommy turns to Johnny and says, "Oh, honey, you're so teary. Are you upset?" Johnny says, "Yes." Mommy says, "What's happening? What's going on? What are you feeling and thinking?" Johnny says, "Charlotte died." And mommy says, "Oh, Johnny, come, let's sit together. We can be sad together. Wilbur loved Charlotte. And it is so sad that Charlotte died." Sometimes people, things, animals, all kinds of things, plants, flowers, gardens, sometimes things that we love die. And in this moment, it is mommy's job to be what we would call affectively attuned, meaning aware of the emotional presentation, otherwise known as affect, of the child. So mommy can meet that child in its distress. Mommy doesn't need to change what the child is feeling. Mommy doesn't need to make the child wrong or bad for feeling emotional, and a big emotion at 9 years old. When in the book Charlotte's Web, Wilbur's beloved Charlotte, the spider, dies. Mommy is a good mommy in this example. She is affectively attuned. She meets the child where he is. She sits with him and she allows him to be in his emotional process. But if you recall our earlier videos, one of the things I talked about is children having intense, overwhelming emotions that they are not helped through, that they are left to navigate on their own, which quite often causes intense levels of stress, the release of cortisol into the child's system, impacting autonomic, sympathetic, and parasympathetic nervous system. And not helping the child through a situation like this is experienced by the child as an abandonment. Certainly in my own life, which was highly traumatic, I had a very problematic mother. I will share more about that with you in other videos. But my experience was my experience was that she would set me up and then abandon me, and set me up and abandon me. A brief example would be I drove some kids to school every day. We all went to the same school in my neighborhood, but it was a drive away. There were some wealthy people in my neighborhood, and they always gave some teenager that lived nearby a nice car to drive their kids to and from school, and then that teenager would be able to use the car the rest of the time. Well, my mother got this idea in her head that I should get snow tires for this car on the credit card of the people that owned the car that gave it to me for the year to drive their kids to and from school. I didn't have their approval. I did have their credit card for gas. My mother forced me to get these tires, put it on their credit card, and when these people who were doing this thing with their cars so their kids could get to and from school found out that I had charged snow tires, they hit the roof. They were so angry. I hadn't gotten their permission, but my mother, in my experience, pushed me and pushed me and pushed me to do it. And what she didn't do was show up to have the conversation with the owners of this car. She just left me to navigate on my own. An abandonment, which was part of my emotional experience in that relationship repeatedly as I was growing up.